All right, and welcome on behalf of the Ohio State University's College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences. I'd like to welcome you all to the Ohio State University South Centers here at Piketon for What's Pestering You event. We hope this will be a very two-way conversation this morning. We're going to start off with some updates from our state specialists. We'll let them all introduce themselves here in just a moment, and then we'll go through and talk a little bit about some of the different aspects of pest management and related topics of climate. And then we'll have a bit of a time where we'll have some open floor for discussion and questions. And then one of our graduate students, I'll introduce here in just a minute, has developed a table discussion guide where we'll go through and think about topics related to pest management at a little more deep level to get information from you, our growers, about what types of things and what types of information you might need for the future and how we can all help in that regard. My name is Dr. Logan Mentor. I'm a field specialist, associate professor. I'm based here at South Center, and I work with specialty crops primarily. I'm also the state IPM coordinator. I'll let the other folks introduce themselves as well at this time.
Okay. I'm Alyssa Essman. I'm the weed science extension specialist, primarily for agronomic crops, so corn, soybeans, forages, small grains.
Good morning. Horacio Lopez Nicora. I'm the soybean pathologist and nematologist at Ohio State.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Karhoff. I'm a field specialist in agronomic systems, so working broadly with all agronomic crops.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Wilson. I'm the Ag Weather and Climate Field Specialist for Extension and the Ag and Natural Resources Program. I'm also the state climatologist of Ohio.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I think, Aaron, would you like to kind of go first, talk to us about climate and some general updates?
Yeah, so everybody loves talking about the weather, right? Let's talk about the weather first. So raise your hand if you enjoyed this winter. Nobody. No snow lovers in here. No cold weather folks, right? So it was a pretty interesting winter, and we'll get into that in a second. So as I mentioned, I work both with, producers across the state in my role in extension, but also as the state climatologist, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. So I'll do a little programmatic, and then we'll talk about some recent conditions. But so as a state climatologist, it's all about delivering weather and climate information that helps folks make better decisions. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? And so we make decisions every day based on weather, and we base our long-term sort of what to plant, what to grow based on the climate that we expect here in Southern Ohio, of course. I grew up in Miamisburg, Ohio, so also Southwest Ohio here a little bit. Got interested in weather when I was a young kid in Miami, Florida, so hurricanes. And then when I came back to Ohio in 1986, a couple years later, what did we have in 1988? Big drought, right? Big drought. That really is what kind of solidified it for me. I was just really in love and captured by what droughts could do. And so, and then sort of my path moving forward from there. So, I take that into consideration when I'm trying to think about what information helps folks make better decisions. And we've had, certainly the last couple of years, we've dealt with some drought conditions right after what we would consider our wettest decade on record. So if you look at the 4 wettest years in Ohio's history, 2011, 17, 18, and 19 are all in the top 10 wettest since 1895. So we look at those trends over time and try to make comparisons to what we're experiencing here and how we can make better decisions with information like that. So we'll get into, think about some of the longer term stuff in just a second. I started off by saying, who liked this winter? I always wanted a 1970s winter. So you can tell me whether I got one or not. I know the answer to that. No, right? But it certainly was the coldest winter we've had since 2015 in Ohio, and one of the coldest that we've had in the last 30 years. If you look at the long-term trends, though, winter is a season where we're warming very significantly, a lot faster than any other season. 8 of Ohio's top 10 warmest winters on record since 1895 have all occurred since 1990, right? So we've been really warm in terms of the winter, and this winter actually was right at the long-term 100-year trend line. So we're still much above most of the 20th century when it comes to winter. 76, 77, that winter was about 5 degrees on average colder than this year. 77, 78, 78, 79. These are 3 of the coldest. And really the 70s is one of the coldest decades in Ohio's history if you look over that 130-year record, versus the 1930s, right? Ohio's warmest winter on record rather, is still the winter of 31-32. That's still the warmest winter in Ohio. So, it's really important. One of the things that in my job that's really important is to make sure that we understand, the trends that we're seeing in the relative short period of time versus that longer term trend. And of course, climates, as they evolve and they change, other things change with it, right? Technology, genetics, our practices, those sorts of things that we really help us continue to produce despite the changes that we're seeing. So, yeah, certainly this winter was cooler than average. If you think back to last year, I think there were some big seasons last year that point to some of the longer term changes we're seeing here in Southern Ohio as well. High variability, right? It seems like we can have really warm Februarys and Marches, and then yet all of a sudden we're talking about late spring freezes in April. There's nothing late about a spring freeze in April, right? But when things are breaking dormancy in February and March, freezes in April become a bigger deal. Think about 2012, and actually this year we've challenged some of those March 2012 high temperature records. Columbus hit its all-time warmest March temperature on record last week at 86 degrees, breaking 2012. And so, we think about some of those really warm conditions out there this year. But when we break dormancy earlier on, right, then the freezes in April become more of a big deal. So we had a very cool May last year, right? Growing degree days struggled at the end of May. And then we flipped to the warmest June and July on record for overnight lows. So these rapid switches between cold to warm. The other thing is we went from, right here, you guys went from a D4 exceptional drought to about 32 inches of rain between April and July last year. And then we had our driest August on record. So how do you keep up with the hydrologic extremes that are going from one to another, right? And that last year is just kind of a symptom of what we're seeing, where this area ended up above average for precipitation last year. Yet we had some, the driest August on record and some drought that continued throughout the winter. Improved a little bit during the winter, and now this area is starting to get a little bit dry again. But certainly, as we think about the exceptional dryness of the last 2 years in droughts, we are looking at situations where we even if we're wetter than average for the entire year, is the water available when we need it as growers, right? And I think that's an important question that we have to face, and what can we do to harvest that water at a time and keep it for when we need it. So that's a little bit of the big stories from last year. And then as we look to this year, anybody heard of Super El Nino yet? All right, that's catching the buzz. I like to slow people down a little bit, right? If you've never seen the Chris Farley 1997 I Am El Nino skit, look it up on YouTube. Do yourself a favor. It's fantastic. Guy was so funny. But anyway, we are obviously heading, we are trending, we think, toward an El Nino situation. So we've been in a La Nina situation, cooler sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific. Typically, it brings a wetter than average winter, not always. Didn't this year, right? El Ninos tend to do two things that could be good for us this year. The forecasts look to be sort of at normal or maybe slightly cooler than normal summer. And then when we get into winter next year, that's typically when we see really dry conditions across the Ohio Valley. So that's not good. But maybe we can avoid some of the extreme heat this summer, and that's typically what our El Ninos bring. There's this thing called the spring predictability barrier that nobody talks about when all the media goes crazy over things like Super El Nino. Our confidence and ability and skill to forecast El Nino in spring is close. It's not nil, but it's low. Right? We think it's going to form, but the impacts and whether the atmosphere couples, right, is informed by the ocean changes will dictate what our storm path looks like. So we got to slow the brakes down a little bit. But right now it does look like the next few weeks to a couple of months here, temperatures look to be close to or a little bit above average. I think April's looking warmer than average. Precipitation-wise, we're leaning towards, in this part of the state, leaning toward maybe slightly wetter than average. But overall, I think the way the pattern's setting up here for April, there are obviously windows for activity. And we can never forecast, obviously, something like last May where we had 22 to 26 days of at least a trace of rainfall. This year, it does look like there'll be some windows there for the spring, and the growing season looks favorable. A sort of lean toward wetter than average, but really close to average precipitation. And then as far as temperature goes, a lean toward warmer than average. And think overnight lows, really those overnight lows. One of the things that we've seen is our daytime highs are not as warm as they were in the early 20th century. And that's because we have a lot more humidity, a lot more water vapor in the atmosphere, which limits the daytime heating, but doesn't allow us to cool off at night. So our temperatures stay warmer overnight. And of course, that can have physiological impacts on our crops and trees and such. So that's sort of the outlook for the next couple months. Combined with a little bit of the long-term stuff. So hopefully that will provide some information for today's conversations, and certainly enjoy being here and talking with you this morning. Thanks.
Thanks.
That's why we put Aaron first. So continuing that conversation about variability and how we in Extension can help producers make decisions amidst that variability. So in my role in terms of pest management, 2 diseases stand out on current research that we're doing right now, both in corn. So the first one, tar spot. So relatively newer corn disease, came in about the tail end of 2018 in Northwest Ohio, earlier in different ice states across the Midwest. And so that's one where we're trying to capture that variability in our weather, coupled with what do we know about how this pathogen operates, and your information as an operator in that field history, management history, and combine all that information to get a forecast system. So can we go in and look at our 7-day, 10-day forecasts at that specific location and understand, do we have a low, medium, high risk of that disease manifesting in that field? And really equip you with information so you can make a decision on whether or not I need to go in and spray a fungicide on that field. What's the right timing for that fungicide? So with tar spot, I think the real difficulty for us right now in Ohio is just understanding when is it going to occur, where, and getting that timing pinpointed, because it can be different than other corn foliar diseases that we're facing right now. So looking at tar spot, and then also the second one of interest for us is gibberella ear rot. So maybe a lower disease pressure here in this part of the state, but others are really facing difficulty with that one because it can not only impact our yield, but probably more of consequence is our quality. So it can produce a toxin called vomitoxin, or you may see it referred to as DON. And that's where we can start getting docked when we're trying to market that grain. And it's a real issue at the producer level, but also when we look at Ohio trying to market that grain as a state and having a channel for that grain if we're dealing with a high contamination level. So taking that same approach where we're trying to take that weather forecast at that specific location, learn as much as we can about what type of weather conditions that pathogen needs to actually cause disease. It can be in that field. We can have a susceptible hybrid, but if we don't have the right environment, like we've seen in past 2 years where we've had drier conditions, July, August, we may not have that disease that's required to really pay for that fungicide application. So going into a year like this one where margins are tighter, I guess my goal is always, how can I make you better equipped to make that decision, to make sure it's going to make sense agronomically, but also make sense economically. So if we are trying to keep that budget bare bone, that way we can get through this year, where can we maybe save some of that application on certain acres or certain conditions where we're not going to have that disease come into play. So those are probably the two bigger items for me in terms of pest management. But of course, I can put out a field trial, and then the weather has a different opinion. So, for example, a lot of these diseases, we're looking at a high moisture, high relative humidity to see a higher disease pressure. And it seemed like in Northwest Ohio, you guys handed off the drought to us this past year, and now we're coming out of that hopefully with some moisture coming into the forecast to get out of that drought conditions going into the 2026 growing season. And then I know Horacio is working on similar things on the soybean side.
Yeah. Can you pass me? There's a bag there.
Yeah.
Just use it for. Okay, cool. Well, good morning, everyone. So as a soybean pathology, I work with pretty much anything that affects soybean, and the way that I was planning to give a little bit of an update of my research was to walk you upwards from the soil all the way up to the above ground part of the soybean. I want to mention though that I brought a bunch of bags with me, and they're back there. And this year or last year, we have been placing a QR code on these bags that have a lot of information about things that we do and things that we collaborate with other pathologists across the United States and create resources. For example, when we evaluate fungicide at different timings for different diseases, we compile those results, we meet with other soybean pathologists across the United States, and we rate and compare how well they worked. Sometimes we want to make an application and we don't know what product to use for a specific disease. You will find a fact sheet that has the different diseases that you may encounter, the different products, and their frag number, which will allow you to rotate fungicides and avoid resistance in a population of pathogen, for example. Other information you will find here are submission forms. How can you submit a sample to the lab so we can help you with diagnosis or any other help that you may need? The bag itself serves as a submission for SCN. So you can submit your soil samples to the lab and we can quantify SCN, which stands for soybean cyst nematode. So these are resources that I prepare for you, and I think that these will help with, the update that I want to give. So starting below ground, I think in Ohio, soybean cyst nematode, and in North America, to be honest, is the most damaging pathogen of soybean. So we're dealing with a pathogen that can cause significant yield reduction, yet does not cause visible symptoms. So you can have a very healthy looking soybean field that has a lot of this pathogen. It's a microscopic worm that will get inside the root and will start feeding from the root system. Now, it's an animal, and very amazingly, this animal can take over the plant machinery. So it infects the plant, it modifies the cells, makes the plant believe that the pods, the seeds, the embryo are actually in the root system of the plant. Of course, there's more detail in the scientific explanation than I'm giving here, but essentially the plants look very healthy, yet the yield is going to feed this animal. And unfortunately, this is one of the main reasons why it gets misdiagnosed or completely overlooked. So we may have fields in our area that when we print our yield map, consistently we have low yielding area and we just don't know why. We've done everything on that part of the field to try and bring those yield up, yet they have been low for some reason. In many cases, when I work with growers and we go and take a soil sample from that area and compare it to an area that is healthy looking, yet yielding a lot, so we see that difference in yield monitor and yield maps, most of the time, soybean cyst nematode is present in that area with low yield. So with funding from Ohio Soybean Council, we receive up to 2 samples free of charge from growers, and we process those and report the numbers of soybean cyst nematode that you may have. Hopefully the results came back non-detected, that's what we want, but in many cases there are significant high levels of SCN. Now, keeping those levels low are the best way to, protect the yield. Than trying to bring very high levels below damage threshold. And the reason I'm saying this is because you may think to yourself, well, I don't have that problem. That big problem is not me. I don't have it. And the nematode population will continue to build up in that field because it does not show significant symptoms. But when the levels get extremely high, that's when you start realizing, well, I plant the same cultivar, the same date across the road, and I'm yielding half what I'm yielding here. So proactively sample fields, know if you have it, rotate sources of resistance. So the best way to manage this problem is with resistance, but we don't want to feed this animal with the same source of resistance. Unfortunately, they adapt to resistance that we have been planted across the US and can now overcome resistance. So we want to not train them to feed on the same genetic material. So PI 88788 is one source of resistance, very common. Try to rotate with Peking, another one, a different source of resistance. The third one is rotate to non-host. I think we do a good job rotating to corn. They cannot reproduce on corn. So by planting corn following soybean, you will reduce the number of SCN. And then consider a seed protectant. We have also seed treatment trials, and we have data, unfortunately very inconsistent in terms of reducing the nematode population. But protecting yield, in many cases, we see that bump in yield. That's SCN. The other problem that we see quite often in Ohio is SDS, sudden death syndrome. Very easy to see. You see the leaf turning yellow, but the vein remaining green. Very easy to identify this issue. However, the same symptoms can be caused by other pathogens. And the one pathogen that we need to be paying attention this year is red crown rot, which causes the same symptoms as SDS. However, red crown rot is an emerging pathogen in the Midwest. It has been around in the southeast part of the United States, in the peanut production area. However, since 2018, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky has been struggling with red crown rot. Red crown rot is a fungus that chews up the root system. It completely rots the root system. As a matter of fact, in the literature, they describe the symptoms as pencil roots. You pull those plants out and they just come very easily. So SDS, red crown rot, soybean cyst nematode pretty much are the ones that we will see and experience damage here in this area. Phytophthora in some areas that are very poorly drained, you will also see this, Phytophthora and Pythium. Resistant is the best way to manage those water molds, coupled with seed treatment. When we're dealing with Phytophthora and Pythiums, the seed treatment should be specific for this group of organisms, because any fungicide will not take care of these water molds. These water molds resemble more plants, genetically speaking, than fungi. So when we apply a seed treatment, we need to make sure that there's a product that will take care of Phytophthora and Pythium. Moving upwards, and you're gonna tell me when I have 5 minutes left or something like that.
5 minutes. No,
you're already 5 minutes? Moving upwards, things that we are evaluating in Northeast Ohio, but sometimes we see it spread across the state, is white mold. White mold normally infects flowering. Again, moderate resistant. There's no complete resistance against this pathogen, but you can look at the seed catalog and there's some rating for white mold. Fungicide application will be a good approach. However, we're used to applying fungicide at R3. This is a pathogen that will infect the plant at flower. It will really go and infect the flower, and that's where the infection will take place. However, we will see the white fluffy mycelia with the black sclerotia that looks like a mouse drop later on in the R3, R4, even R5. Plants are starting to wilt. We can walk and open those rows, and we see the plants that are completely dead. Agricultural management, such as reducing plant density and spacing our rows, will also help. So that microclimate is something that we're really interested in looking and understanding more. We talked with Aaron about this. Some of our foliar pathogens that we experience in Ohio, however, in very low pressure for the past 3 years, are frog eye leaf spot caused by Cercospora sohina, Septoria brown spot, normally constrained on the lower canopy, and Cercospora leaf blight is one that we're looking more into. It's that purple bronzing that we sometimes see on the leaf, and also purple stain seeds that normally we see when we harvest. Resistance is the best way to approach. Of course, when we experience a lot of pressure with frog eye leaf spot, let's say, there are cultivars that are resistant, but a fungicide application will be helpful after we walk our fields close to the R3 growth stage before applying, and we actually see some of the symptoms out there. We have conducted with Laura Lindsay and 2 of our graduate students 3-year studies of fungicide application across Ohio. So we choose 2 commercial fields in northern Ohio or northwest, where we do a lot of soybean, central Ohio, and southern Ohio. So we try to capture the whole state, and we went and we applied fungicide at V5. I recall at that time we were communicating with our industry partners. So one of the things that I'm very proud about my program is that we keep connecting and having conversation with our private collaborators. We want to hear, what are the things that they are telling their growers, what are the growers telling them. And one of the questions they asked was, what about if we do a V5 application of a fungicide? We piggyback on our herbicide application, maybe, right? And we tank mixed with fungicide, and we will take care of that septoria, keep our leaf greener, and then maybe bump our yield. So we take this type of questions and we set up the experiments, and we had 3 years across 18 locations where we did V5 application followed by R3 application, which is very standard here in Ohio, and then R5 a little bit later. And for the past 3 years with low disease pressure, we have seen absolutely no significant difference comparing to the the untreated control. Moreover, we did an economic analysis to see if we were at least tying or getting something in return. So we evaluated if we were at least tying ROI of 0. But then we don't want to do that. When we do something, we want to make money. And then we evaluated if we were able to at least gain $10 extra out of that application or the whole operation, right? And for the past 3 years, we absolutely were losing money by doing that. So the percentage of just tying or making money was between 17% and 30%. And that's at R3. So sometimes I have conversations with growers and say, well, I'm just going to apply and do it as an insurance. And sometimes my question is, well, if you don't, then you can take your kids to Disney. Or you can, get that extra money and not spend that time in the field. But it requires us walking the fields and evaluating if we're gonna apply or not. So with that, I think that was 10 minutes.
It's 10-ish.
So thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'll cover some different topic areas here. We'll talk about some of the weed species that are giving us most trouble statewide. We'll look at some product updates and then finish with some regulatory stuff, everyone's favorite topic, right? But Stephanie here leads extension educators in conducting a survey where just before harvest in soybean, counties are driven and assessed for the frequency and distribution of different weed species. And this allows us to understand how well our herbicide programs worked for that growing season, and also forecast potential issues, knowing what weeds are in the field at the end of the season. And we've done some of this work since basically 2019. We've really found water hemp has taken off across the state, right? It's now the #1 most commonly encountered species on that survey, which is problematic as it's also one of our most herbicide-resistant species, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Some other problem species I don't think are super surprising: giant ragweed, our foxtails, mare's tail, some of those more classic Ohio weeds. But I want to focus more on water hemp and maybe a little bit about a species that if it's not in the area, I'd be surprised if it wasn't in this area, but it's kind of creeping northwards across the state, which is Italian or annual ryegrass, which is becoming another big problem that we're getting a lot of calls about. But we're concerned about water hemp for a number of reasons. If we go west, some of our I-states and others kind of in this Eastern Corn Belt region have a lot of issues with water hemp. And we, following their progression, looking at the herbicide resistance development in those populations, we kind of can see our future and kind of the potential this weed has to really just become resistant to not only all of our herbicide, but a lot of our different management tactics. Plant for plant, it's actually not the most competitive plant. We think about something like common cockleburr, giant ragweed. Those are really competitive plants if we just compare individuals. But the life strategy of water hemp is that it can really take over an entire field in a very short period of time, and it has some characteristics that help it do that, right? So it is extremely prolific, somewhere in the range of 500,000 to 1 million seeds per plant, which is why we're so concerned about seeing it in the field at the end of the season on the survey, is because we know the amount of seeds going to the seed bank. The seed bank is something weed scientists are very interested in studying, and we have some students looking at better understanding it and how to evaluate it and how we manage that. But the seed bank is really where water hemp thrives in producing these millions of seeds. It grows extremely fast, upwards of inch and a half a day. We've talked about some of these troublesome weather patterns, especially in the spring, which means just a couple days misses if we can't get out into the field. It's really hard to hit those labeled rates, and it can often get out of range or taller than what our herbicide labels suggest for effective applications and make it really difficult to manage. It has a really long emergence window and a different emergence pattern. So something like giant ragweed starts to come up like now, right? We can go out and we can see some giant ragweed. Tends to come up early and then drop off about midsummer, whereas water hemp doesn't really come up until later in the season, needs some more heat units, but it continues to emerge up to and through basically summer, early fall. So it's a really long period that we have to consider management of water hemp in our crop fields. And then the icing on the cake, of course, is this herbicide resistance issue. It's a dioecious species, meaning the male and female are separate. They outcross to reproduce, and these millions of seeds then have really high genetic variability, and there's a lot higher probability that one of these individuals in the population has that trait for herbicide resistance, maybe an altered pathway, different target site, or some sort of enzyme that allows it to break down the herbicide. And just a few of those survivors each year allows the population to build up that resistance trait until it can no longer be controlled at the population level. So part of our work and understanding and managing water hemp has been some integrated weed management trials looking at cover crops and how we can use some other tools. But a lot of this has also been about understanding our herbicide resistance development. We have a couple grad students who have looked at pre and post programs, and we found a pretty high frequency of atrazine at a pretty high magnitude of resistance in our populations. We no longer screen for group 2, our ALS inhibitors, or group 9, our glyphosate, as we more or less expect resistance to those products. But we've screened group 5, our atrazine, group 14, famecifin, Callisto, group 27, and group 4, so our synthetic auxins, or 2,4-D. Part of this work has been regional, and so we've sent off some samples to be also screened for glufosinate, dicamba, and 2,4-D at some other universities, and we have a couple populations that have been kind of flagged as potential for resistance that we're working through screening to be able to officially confirm resistance, but we have a few populations that came back with the 2,4-D at pretty high magnitudes, one population about 7-fold and one about 16-fold. So we need to do some more testing on those, but basically the story is any resistance we see in surrounding states is a potential here, and we're kind of on this trend where we're seeing more resistance to different herbicides in our water hemp populations. Italian or annual ryegrass is one of those we're seeing at increasing rates, and it's one that's really difficult to manage, right? It has this primarily fall emergence pattern, and actually as we go north to south in the region, there's some different emergence, and they're trying to understand, what fraction comes up in spring versus fall. In Ohio, we expect mostly fall, and so how do we manage it before it comes up? Knowing the timing of our applications is important, and then in the spring, if we let it get to that point, managing it before crop emergence, which is tricky. And so right now where we're at is trying to understand where it is in the state. So if you have this issue, feel free to reach out to us so we can help work with you on that and then manage it and determine, also what resistance exists in those populations. In terms of products, there's a couple new products. A lot of the products coming to market, if you've heard us talk, are premixes of existing active ingredients, right? Putting them in new and interesting combinations or formulations to improve efficacy, but really we're dealing with the same products we've been dealing with for upwards of 30 years in some cases. And so kind of the message right now is that, we're not going to spray our way out of an issue caused by herbicides. And so how can we use integrated tactics, agronomic practices, along with comprehensive programs to kind of provide some additional support to our herbicide programs and relieve some of that selection pressure that we're seeing. Short term, there are a couple of new products specifically for the soybean market that will be interesting. The longer term, there's hope for a new actual mode of action. There's new soybean trait systems coming. We have hope for those, but the caution is that, a lot of these still rely on the same modes of action within soybean. So if we're repeating those in both soybean and corn, how do we manage that to, again, reduce our selection pressure for resistance in those situations? I'd be remiss if I don't mention dicamba. So last growing season, over-the-top applications of dicamba and soybean was not an option. Pretty late in the game, earlier this year, they came out, and we now have labels for 3 products for over-the-top application of dicamba and soybean. So Ingenia, Tavium, and then Extendamax is now Striax as the Bayer product. So these all have labels, and they are allowed for over-the-top application in soybean for this year, which leads to kind of a bigger issue or consideration as we think about pesticide applications in the coming years, which is the Endangered Species Act and how that's going to change our herbicide applications and pesticide applications moving forward, right? So it's not just herbicides, but it's insecticides, fungicides, or rodenticides. Basically anything we apply that has a label that goes through the EPA process is going to have some new language and change how we think about and are able to make applications. And so the Endangered Species Act itself doesn't change herbicide labels. What it does is it sets new frameworks for the EPA to make these labels, right? So on these labels, there's going to be new language related to the Endangered Species Act specifically, and pointing you to a new website called the EPA Bulletins Live 2. And what this really means is that there's going to be now 2 places to look for information related to herbicide applications. One is the herbicide label, and the second is this EPA Bulletins Live 2. Right, so within 6 months of application, checking these websites to confirm that we don't have what are called PULAs or pesticide use limitation areas. Within these areas, we might have additional mitigation strategies, and that's a whole other topic we won't get into, but if you want more information on kind of how to manage this, reach out to your local educator or myself in our program, and we can get you more information on this. One other question we commonly get is, how many products right now are there? So we have Liberty Ultra and these 3 new dicamba products and a couple premixes, but right now it's a pretty small group, and most of them don't have too many additional mitigation changes. And these points are a little bit easier to get than we might assume. And so a lot of it right now comes down to record keeping, but this record keeping is important, as where this will come up is, if there is an event of off-target movement, that's where maybe the ODA gets involved and there's some enforcement of this. But prior to that, it's just diligent record keeping, making sure we're having our points. And as these new products are labeled and come to market, we'll of course be putting out more information, but keeping up on that and making sure we have our mitigation strategies in place and our record keeping tightened up puts us in the best position to avoid some of those issues.
All right. Well, thanks, Alyssa. So I just wanted to kind of wrap up here talking a little bit broadly about the IPM program in Ohio. And that was one of the things I was going to bring up. I'm glad you did, is regulation. I was just at the national meeting here recently, talking to other state coordinators. And that's where most of the buzz is looking at the regulation right now regarding Endangered Species Act and things of that nature. So our program here in Ohio, the IPM program as a whole is funded through the USDA, NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It's on a 3-year cycle that funds our program. We're coming up on this fall, I think, when the renewal is expected to come out for us to rewrite our program. So we appreciate any input you guys have today on that. That'll actually help us to inform the direction we go in the future. We've had positive feedback so far from Washington as well as here at the local level on that. So I just wanted to make comment about that. On the specialty crop side, which is the other part of my job, I work a lot with growers thinking about diversification. That's just something I want to mention today, is thinking about all these different aspects we talked today about, thinking about tight returns and things of that nature, and thinking about crop diversification. I work with lots of different crops. And the growers I work with, thinking about how we can stabilize the bottom lines, all the bottom lines, with that concept. We also do a lot with monitoring pests throughout the state. So a couple new resources you might not be aware of. In the back here, we have on the resource table our eFields, which is the on-farm research publication reports for agronomic crops, and also ePlus. ePlus is the newest of our series here at Ohio State, which just started beginning of 2024. So we're just starting our 3rd season now. If anyone's interested in participating in that, please let me know. And kind of in tandem with that, we also have our specialty crop monitoring network, where we monitor for insect and disease pests across the state. And we've developed, at least for the insect pest right now, you can get live updates for your county. There's a website, it's just go.osu.edu/traps. And it will, you can click on a county, any county you want that's participating, and it'll show you the updates for the species that we're trapping in that county up to the very week that you're looking at. So as soon as they're monitored by our county educators, they're out all over the state, they put the data in there, that information will pop up. We're working on right now, last year's information is still up there, but over the next couple weeks, we'll be switching that over to the 2026 season. So you'll be able to see those kind of updates there. I just want to make sure that resource was mentioned to everybody and it's out there. At this point, we're going to move into our second part of the activity or discussion for the day. So I'd like to introduce someone else. So this is Nicole Volk. Nicole is a PhD student in our Agriculture Communications Leadership Program. And Nicole has developed a set of questions she's going to go through. At each of your tables, one of our extension professionals is there to help kind of guide and record answers. So I'd like you all as a group to discuss and think about Nicole's questions. She'll go through some kind of guideposts of how we're going to migrate through this discussion. And if you have any questions at the end, we'll still be around later if you want to ask us anything else. Okay. Well, thank you, Nicole.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. As Logan said, my name is Nicole Volk. I'm a PhD student in the Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership Department. So I'm coming at this from more of the, that's why I'm facilitating a discussion this morning, coming at it from more of the social science lens than our wonderful panel here. What we're going to do for the remainder of our time is kind of get your perception. So these folks want to know what's going on your sites. We want to know how we can better help and assist, what information you need, what information you know. And so our table guides, you do have a guide there to help you kind of walk through. what we'll do is I will be kind of providing one overarching question. And there are some additional prompts or thoughts there for our discussion guides to help you probe deeper and work through. So there's no right answer here, of course. We're very interested in everyone's perception, regardless of your style of farm, your size, what you're growing. And so it will be helpful to hear what is working and within your contexts, so we can get a better understanding of what this looks like. So we are going to center within integrated pest management and talking about pest management in general. And so really, again, it's not about what anyone is doing right. We're here to listen and understand how those management decisions are happening on your farm, what works, what doesn't, and what is influencing your decisions. And so we know that pest management can be different things to different people, and we want to know what your definition and thoughts are, not what any particular academic is telling you it should be. So to start us off, hopefully everyone is at a table. I think we've got 3 tables, which is excellent. And so what we'd like to do is start off, and if you don't know the folks at your table, talk about what your farm looks like a little bit, and then share, when you hear the term integrated pest management, what does that mean to you? So when you think about IPM, what does it mean? And if you don't think about it or you don't have a definition, that's okay too. So I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes here to chat about this. Table monitors, if you'll also take notes as best of your ability, we appreciate it. All right, so I'm going to try not to interrupt discussions too much, but as you're chatting, go ahead and start thinking about and chatting about what are the biggest pest challenges that you're dealing with on your farm right now. So think about this from the thought of, is it weeds, disease, insects, soil-borne issues, or other matters that you consider a pest, such as policy or lack of research? What pests are you dealing with on your farm at this point? All right, so to kind of add on to the conversation you're already having, think about, and maybe you've started sharing these, but what strategies or approaches have worked best for you when you're managing your pest challenges? What hasn't worked and what haven't you been able to address? Of course, we've already heard about slugs, but what other pest issues have you tackled well? Which ones are you still struggling with? And which ones are you just really frustrated about? All right, so we're gonna take a pause here for a second, and I'm curious if anyone has any issues or frustrations that they want to share back, so our panel can kind of hear what's being chatted about. So either if the farmers would like to share, or if our table moderators have anything in particular we've been discussing, that way we can kind of get some more knowledge in there.
Lots of frustrations at our table, and it has to do with ticks and slugs. It just, we're not no livestock people in the room, but these ticks are getting all over these calves and these cows, and we think it could be spreading, diseases or whatever from the deer. Because if you look at a deer in the middle of summer, they're loaded with ticks. And are we getting? We're having some issues with calves this spring. Lots of calves dying. Is that something related to these ticks that are getting on the cattle? I don't. And then the whole slug thing. Dan was just saying how his planter was just dripping with slugs after he gets. Oh God, yeah, there's a picture of it. So those are very frustrating issues.
So yeah, I'm not sure about the cattle issue per se, but the issue with ticks is going up. We have in recent years here in Ohio increased the number of medically and veterinarily important ticks. It used to be just 1 or 2 species of problems back 20 years ago. I remember I was in college, my professor got super excited because someone brought in a Lone Star tick. We'd never seen one in this area before. Now you walk outside, you get one, along with several other species. That's actually one piece of the IPM program as well, is looking at that aspect. Our colleague that handles that isn't here today, but it's something that we are as a whole working on for sure. Slugs, does anyone want to say anything more? Actually, we were just up here talking about slugs, Dan, brainstorming some more. We've had conversations about this, and I'll let Steph maybe add a little bit more to this, but I think a lot of it is looking at the whole management ecosystem type aspect.
Yeah, we were talking about it just a moment ago, and it's difficult because it's not an insect, so we can't go in with an insecticide. And in long term, there's strategies, like you said, building up those natural predators. The question is, how do we do that, and how do we monitor how successful it is? So if I remove that insecticide seed treatment on my soybean crop and try to promote those natural predators, do I know what's on my seed treatment? What active ingredients are there? And I always advocate, if you are going to remove that insecticide piece, make sure you keep the fungicide if you have those soil-borne pathogens. So understanding what's on that seed when you're purchasing it can be the biggest hurdle sometimes. And then secondly, short term, how aggressive are you with your planting date? If we are being ultra early, maybe it sounds scary, but push it back just to get some more heat units for that soybean right out the gate so it can outpace that growth. But like you said, if your planter's dripping, it gets about near impossible to outpace that kind of feeding with those slugs. So it doesn't matter what county I go to, all 88, everyone is shaking their heads about slugs. So it's something that's on our radar.
Along the same question, usually we think, well, a good, hard, cold winter is going to wipe out some of these bug problems. And we were just talking about, you could have walked in a grassy area right after all the snow melted off and all that cold, nasty weather we had, and you'll get ticks. You still get ticks. Anytime, once your kids go out and play in the yard, well, then you better be checking them for ticks, because the odds are they're going to have them. But we just seem to have an exponential large amount of ticks going around. And our concern is those ticks are on something else before they get onto those cattle. What are they transmitting, potentially transmitting problems that we might be seeing, might be correlated. We don't know. And I know it's not for livestock. But.
No, it's all good points, because I mean, with our team, we want to make sure we're looking across systems, and that includes livestock. And on the slugs, one piece I forgot to mention is our entomologist, field crop entomologist, Kelly Tillman, out of the Worcester campus. She does have a slug monitoring network that we are participating in here in Ohio. And so what that looks like is they're digging pits to see how many slugs are present and what weather conditions are they more present in. And a lot of times we think about slugs only as a wet problem. And even when we dry out, the slugs are still there. They're just deeper into that soil profile. So when you said the ticks, thinking a cold winter is going to knock them out, a dry spell doesn't get rid of the slug problem either. So I think the more we can understand the biology of a lot of these different pests, we can have a sharper tool to manage them. Long term, I think we'll be in a better place.
Are there any other frustrations? We've talked about ticks, slugs. Anyone else have thoughts just from our first kind of half of our discussion?
Another thing at camp at our table, folks like Aaron's done a great job getting all these weather stations throughout the state up and running really good now compared to 10, 15 years ago. And we got a lot of good data out there, especially when it comes to tar spot and comes to disease forecasting. The consensus here was farmers don't have time to sit and read big newsletters once a week. And I know I'm working with Andreas on some downy mildew stuff. He's now collecting growers' text numbers, phone numbers, and he's going to text when a downy mildew is coming in on the sentinel plots like Logan has down here and stuff, just to get out quick, because in the heat of the season, nobody has time to sit and read a big once-a-week newsletter. So if maybe with the good tools we got now, monitoring and knowing when leaf wetness is, when disease pressures and heat units, get that out to the growers quicker by 10. I think everybody's willing to give their phone numbers to get a text message in the tractor instead of having to read a newsletter.
One tool that is available, and for pretty much several crops, including soybean, corn, alfalfa, I think cotton now, is in the crop protection network. And you can access these, through your phone. And there are different resources there, fact sheets, etc. But under tools, they have different resources such as the disease forecasting tool. Now, this is a national collaboration, but some of the data comes from Ohio. So you have the Y mold and frog eye leaf spot forecasting tool. We have the Dawn forecasting tool for Gibberella earrod, which pretty much feeds from Pierce Paul, Steph, and everybody that is collecting data from Ohio. And pretty much is dropping a pin wherever you are, and that collects the weather data available. And with information from our different trials, it generates a low, moderate, or high risk of that particular disease. The misuse of that is high risk, I'm going to go and spray. I normally recommend high risk, go and walk that field. Maybe you're going to see the presence of the pathogen and then spray. But it's a good resource, and we're validating. We're looking how well these forecasting tools are working. We're seeing if in Ohio it says, hey, high risk spray, that it was really warranted for us to go and make some type of management. And then we improve with that research from that year. So that's a good resource to go and check. It's not a corn newsletter or an extensive write-up that you need to read. It's more like a map that you go and put the pin of your field, and it gives you some indication of what's going on. Crop Protection Network.
Excellent.
There's a tar spot there as well.
I don't think it has the alert feature yet. That's something we can take back to the developers if they're not already working on. But I would imagine that maybe it's already in the works.
So that makes for an excellent transition then to talking about how do you decide if, when, and what to apply during pest management for the season. So thinking about your fungicides, herbicides, seed treatments, other inputs, what information are you using to help make those decisions? What information do you think you need to help you in, during your growing season to make those in the moment decisions? And we'll go back to your table discussion at this point. All right, so as you're talking about how you make these decisions, what information sources are you all using? So what information do you come from? Is it your on-farm experience? Is it university research? Is it certified crop consultants, other retailers, farm trials, or other areas, your neighbors, for instance? So who are you going to? Where are you turning to get information? And which do you find to be the most influential? Is there one that you would trust above another if they were contradictory? All right. Going to have kind of some of our final questions here, but as you're thinking about making these pest management decisions, what would help make these decisions easier or make you more confident in those decisions? So think about, are there certain tools, and you may have started discussing these, but are there tools or programs or extension support that you would like to see? Are there certain programs that have been particularly helpful to you as you've gone through these decisions? Are there certain programs that were not as useful, or certain tools that are out there that you don't find to be as robust or useful as they could be for your particular farm? So we'll give you time for that, and then we'll come back and chat a little bit.
All right. Well, I want to, once again, on behalf of the College of Food, Ag, and Environmental Sciences, thank you all for coming out today, spending some of the time this morning. I know it's a beautiful morning, very hard to stay out of the fields. My crew and I are also itching to get out there and do some work right now too. But we really appreciate your time and effort in helping inform us here about what we can do as far as pest management goes, helping to understand your needs and what you might need help with, and in which ways we can provide some of that through extension and through the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences here at OSU.